My name is Katie Paris Hasara, and I am interviewing Carl Scott as part of the Utah Humanities Grant titled New Tales for Old Trails to Utah, Oral Histories by the People Who Discovered Them. Today is Thursday, August 7th, 2025, and we are recording this oral history using Zoom. Carl is at home in Nebraska, and Katie is in Utah.
My name is Carl Scott. I grew up in a little farming community in Wapello, Idaho. Virtually everybody that went to church there had pioneer ancestors, and I never thought much about it at the time. I moved to Omaha, Nebraska with my family in 1969, working for an insurance company here. I became acquainted with Gail Holmes and worked with him actually in 1978 when I was stake public communications director of the Omaha, Nebraska stake, and he was the stake historian. He actually introduced me to a lot of information about my ancestors that I was not familiar with. And that kind of started my interest in the pioneer history of winter quarters in the middle Missouri Valley. I did a little work on it interspersed off and on over the next 40 years in my business career. I retired in 2006 as the senior vice president of a Fortune 500 insurance company. And we were called the service missionaries in the Mormon Trail Center. And I began studying in earnest a lot of information about pioneer history. I read over 100 books out of the Pioneer Research Library and journals, and got to know a lot more about the history of the area. In 2008, I ran into Gail Holmes again at the Trail Center, and he asked me if I would take over the management of the Pioneer Research Group and join him in his efforts. I said yes, and for about the last 18 years, I've been engaged in helping the researchers, the historians of this area, tell their stories.
Okay, so is that when your love of history began after moving there? Have you always had an interest in history outside of this topic, or did it start with this area?
Well, I've always had an interest in history. It was some of my favorite classes in high school, and in college, I liked some of the history courses. So I've had an interest in history. But I guess my passion for history really started here when I began to engage in reading the books and the journals and listening to Gail and others of our historian group here talk about the history of this area. It became a passion to learn the history, but not only that, to provide the means by which these pioneer stories could continue to be told so the people understood the sacrifice, the courage, the excitement that the pioneers had as they moved across the plains to settle the Great Basin in the Intermountain West.
Okay. So you mentioned Gail Holmes, and is there anything that you could tell us more about him for those of us who don't know much about him, maybe his background? Why was he so involved in this research of this specific thing? And did he have another profession, or was this what he did?
Gail Holmes grew up on a farm in North Dakota. He was not a member of the church at the time. He studied journalism at the University of Minnesota, and then enlisted in the Army Air Corps towards the end of the Second World War. He actually flew P-38 Lightning fighter planes on reconnaissance missions in the Second World War in the Pacific. When he came home, he married his childhood sweetheart, and they met missionaries in North Dakota. He was working for a newspaper up there, but looking for more opportunity. met missionaries, they joined the church, and he got a job offer from the Omaha World Herald. And he moved to Omaha to work for the World Herald. And as a new member of the church, he was interested in the history of the church. As a journalist, his passion for who, what, where, why, and just tell me the facts served him well. He became captivated by not just the Mormon history of this area, but the history. This area was literally the crossroads of the West. He studied Lewis and Clark and their experiences here and their journals. He read the journals and histories of John C. Fremont, Major Stephen B. Long, who did a scientific expedition across the plains. He studied Fort Atkinson that was established up just upriver from here in the 1820s into the early 30s. He studied the fur trade, the trappers, the French trappers, the English trappers. He studied the Indian tribes. He became well acquainted with members of the tribes today who were directly descended of the chiefs of the tribes in that time. In fact, he wrote a book, 5 Chiefs Who Led Through Change. His passion for the facts and then the history of the Mormon church in this area. He did incredible research and documentation. He became, over the 60 some years that he worked at it, the preeminent historian of the church, the pioneer experience, all of their settlements up and down the middle Missouri Valley, the preeminent historian in the church on this area because of his passion for detail. I think it was his journalism background.
Yeah, that's an excellent combination. And thanks to you, I now know his name. And so I was able to find videos of him on YouTube. So he lives on and his research lives on. But is there another place that his research is and has been stored or is being used?
Yes. The Historical Pioneer Research Group that I'm the chairman of, which is a repository of all of his work, the earlylds.com website includes Crossroads to the West, which includes videos of Gail Holmes. Our YouTube channel, you've seen, includes videos of Gail. We invested several $1,000s with Kindex, which is an organization in Salt Lake that captures historical data. They have captured almost 40 banker boxes full of detailed notes and research, as well as 40 some radio programs that Gail did in Council Bluffs over the years. And that research is now accessible through Kindex. And as our new website, we're rebuilding our website now. As our new website rolls out, it's going to include a section called Treasure Troves, and people will be able to dive into Gail's original research through our site.
That's so nice.
We've captured, I think, virtually all of his magnificent work and research.
Excellent. He really is knowledgeable and he's very pleasant to watch and listen to as well. He seemed like I mean, he's smart and engaging, and I enjoyed listening to him.
Well, Gail, when Gail started his research in this area way back in the 60s, the church was there wasn't even a stake here. The first stake was formed in 1964. And it was the Winter Quarter stake, and the boundaries were from South Dakota on the north, Kansas on the south, Kearney on the west, and a third of Iowa on the east. And most of the communities weren't really excited about sharing the fact that their roots were Mormon. There were RLDS branches all up and down the middle Missouri Valley. Gail Holmes was a bridge builder. He had a soft manner about himself. He built bridges with all of those RLDS churches, with the historical societies up and down the valley, the cemetery societies, anybody who touched on the history. Gail built bridges with them. Uh, One of our board members, when I took over, was Lou Wagon, who was a very high authority in the RLDS and then Community of Christ. Um, Helped open doors to historical information all the way up and down the middle Missouri Valley. So I look at Gail and say, not only was he a magnificent historian using his journalism training, but he was a bridge builder.
I love that. That's a great term. And I can tell he inspired you. Most
Yeah.
definitely. You were friends and you learned from him and probably learned from each other. So how did you become involved in really the updating and adding to the history of the area through your work with him and beyond, maybe?
Well, it first started in 1978 when I was the public communications director. And the stake president, William R. Hinckley, asked me to put together a presentation to take to the church on the possibility of developing a Mormon Trail Visitor Center. Gail Holmes was the historian. I was absolutely stunned with the amount of information that he was able to pull together. And he was the one that told me that my great great grandfather, John Scott, was an integral part of the story. He was charged by Brigham Young with bringing the cannon, shot, and powder from the Mississippi to the Missouri. And Gail had researched that. He'd found the orders. Uh, so he told me things about my ancestor that I didn't know. My great grandfather was a little boy here in 1846 at 4 years old. Now that resonates with me because I became a great grandfather a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Okay. And to think
Yes.
my great grandfather was a little boy here in 1846 tied things even closer.
Yeah.
And then in the 70s, the church asked us to do the four generations. And I found that I had a wealth of pioneer history. The Scots were engaged very early. My grandfather, mom, joined the church in Sweden in 1880s, immigrated in 1890s, wound up in Wapello. He was 96 years old at our wedding.
Wow.
Uh, the other side of my family, my mom's side, the Harmons and the Williams, joined the church in 1849 in Wales, immigrated in 1856, and then ultimately found her way up into Idaho. Okay. My wife's history, all of her ancestors, the Bradys, the Evans, um, Winslow Farr, the Stoddards, C.C. Christensen, the artist, all early members of the church. So I've had such a rich family history that it just felt right to tell the story of the pioneers, to tell the story of their sacrifice. I think you can see the picture on the wall behind me
I can.
of the family standing at the grave at winter quarters.
Hmm.
So I guess a culmination of those things started in 78. And then after my career in insurance, I dabbled in and out of it as I had time. I traveled a lot in the insurance business. But when Gail offered the opportunity to become intimately involved in his work, I did. Now, I've never claimed to be a historian. I can be a pretty good storyteller. Okay. My my focus was to find ways to help the historians of this area, Gail and Terry and Bob Sharp and others, how to tell the story. They had a wealth of information, but they had no income.
Hmm.
So I've been the primary fundraiser.
Oh,
Um,
so that would be through the Historical Pioneer Research Group, right?
that is correct.
Okay. Can we back up to where you mentioned the Mormon Trail Center? And so you created a video for um, helping that come to be. And then
Well,
what has your involvement been with the Mormon Trail Center?
Well, like I said, in 1978, William R. Hinckley, our stake president, asked for this presentation. It was not video at that time. We used slides. I was in charge of product release for the company I worked for at the time, and I used slides. So I built the presentation around slides of this area, and then details about Gail had provided a bit of information that happened every day from the time the pioneers arrived in 1846 until they were called to leave in 1853. And so there was a wealth of information in the slide shown. President Hinckley took it to Salt Lake. I don't know who he presented it to. It wasn't until a number of years later that there was actually a trail center here. I was a bit part of that. The lady who owned the property where the trail center is now had written a letter to the church saying, I've watched your members care for the Pioneer Cemetery and keep it beautiful all my life. If you would like to buy my property after I pass, I'll sell it to you. And I met the fellow from the church at the airport and took him on a tour around the area, showed him the cemetery, the property the lady had, the old mill. And then I was released as public communications director. And obviously, the church bought the property, and then it ultimately became the Mormon Trail Center. How much influence the slide presentation had, I have no idea.
But you've spent some time there.
When we retired in 2006, we were called as service missionaries in the Mormon Trail Center. And we served there 3 to 4 days a week for 4 years. And in that period of time, I read over 100 books on the pioneer history of the area, journals, did tours of the trails, of the settlements, all that thing, became immersed in the history of the area. And during most of that time, I was working with the Historical Pioneer Research Group to help them tell the story, document the burials. We used ground penetrating radar, an engineering firm out of Kansas City that was credentialed so that it would be accepted by state and federal and anybody else. And we've documented close to 1,000 burials up and down the valley, and 13, 14, at least 15 cemeteries, documented, rebuilt the Cutler's Park Monument and the memorial on the hill there. Just did an enormous amount of work with the Historical Pioneer Research Group. But Gail passed away about 3 years ago at the age of 100. The other real researchers of the group, Terry Leahy and Bob Sharp, are both getting older, not able to get out and do those things anymore. My vision is compromised, so I don't drive. Dr. Shawn Anderson Young retired from BYU. She lives in Utah. She's on our board and continues to do a lot of background research, filling out the information on the 90-some settlements up and down the valley. And we started a new piece of that called Sojourn in the Wilderness, where she takes one of the prominent pioneers from each settlement and creates a script based on journals, and the pioneer comes alive and tells the story. So my focus now is to have sufficient funds to rebuild the website to include all of the information that we have. We have an app called Map and Tour that we're rebuilding, which is it's interesting. You can have it on a phone or an iPad. And if you wanted, for example, to go to the site where Brigham Young was actually revelation received that he was to be the prophet, seer, and revelator and president of the church, which happened at Orson Heights Cabin in about October of 18 47, you can pull it up and it'll tell you the story, and then you push the arrow and Google Earth comes on, the map comes on, and it'll take your car right to the spot. So you can actually be there and see where that took place. And that app will take people up and down all the settlements. There are an amazing number of people who come back and say, I have an ancestor buried in Potawatomi County in this cemetery. And on our app, they can find the cemetery, see the story, the cemetery, see the story of the settlement, and actually drive there if they choose to.
That's amazing. So your goal of keeping these pioneer stories alive, you're doing it. That's incredible. What a great
Exactly.
work. Great work. So, would I be correct saying that the ground penetrating radar has been a major focus for the Historical Pioneer Research Group, as well as your updating and keeping things going and adding to and
Yes. Yeah. The
so
ground penetrating radar costs approximately $3,000 a day. And we can usually do 3 to 4 locations in a day. And I followed Gail Holmes' pattern. I've offered pro bono services to the cemetery societies in the Missouri that have said, you know, we know there's some burials here. We don't know where they are. Can you help us? And we've helped them locate burials in their cemeteries to help them tell the story. We work with historical societies. We had one project, the one where we documented the foundation of Orson Hyde's cabin. The local historical society had said there was an indication of an Indian mound society that had been talked to for years. Could we check and see if it was real? Well, we did, we donated the effort and the time and the radar to work on some of these projects to help build the relationships up and down the valley. And it's been valuable. And the radars, it's interesting. You can document the burials without question.
and so that is the locating of where people are lying is the goal of that. There's not been like exhumed, they haven't been exhumed or
Oh, no,
anything
no,
like that.
no,
It's
no.
just finding them where these
We,
graves are.
right. Here's the deal. In the Midwest, the soil is deep and rich. It rains a lot. They never buried people here 6 feet deep. They were usually 3 to 4 feet at the most. They weren't buried in vaults. They were usually wrapped in a blanket, occasionally a wood box, but mostly a blanket. After 170 some years, if you dug the grave up, if you could find anything, it would be teeth. Everything else would have disintegrated. Now, there have been a couple of occasions. Potter's Camp is on property owned by the Miller brothers, about 7 to 10 miles north of Council Bluffs, north of Canesville at that time. And it was right on the road between Canesville and Fort Leavenworth in Kansas Territory, Indian Territory at the time. In 1950, they widened that gravel road and they actually disturbed some bones. Mm. And the Miller brothers contacted Terry Lady and Bob Sharp on our group and said, we think there was a settlement here. And based on journals, we did too. So we've documented the burials at Potter's Camp, and the Miller brothers built an Osage orange wood fence all the way around it. And we built and prepared a memorial and installed it that tells the story. So occasionally there could be a bone fragment or something, but in general, we've not ever gone to the problem of trying to dig up bones in this area.
Okay, so Would you say there have been challenges in this work?
Challenges?
Yes. Or is
Yeah,
it just really easy and everything goes as expected and no problems?
no. Uh, let's talk about Harris Grove, one of the places we were going to document burials. We'd been on 3 different sites that day, and Harris Grove was the last site. We had permission from the landowner. We trotted through the fields, over fences, and got through trees and ran the radar, and we couldn't find anything but tree roots. It was just a total bust. When we got back, it was at least a year later, on additional research, we found that the burial ground was actually on the other side of the fence line, out in the middle of what was now a cornfield. And the landowner said we would come back, but we haven't gone back to Harris Grove yet. I'm not sure that we will, given our current circumstances. But yeah, it's never easy. When we did Gallon Grove, I ran the weed eater. The ground penetrating radar has to be able to get relatively close to the ground. So, yeah, I'm running weed. We got people pulling weeds, chopping brush, getting the ground ready so the radar can work. There have been all kind of interesting and kind of fun stories actually with it. When we did Cutler's Park, the ground on Cutler's Park, they had a new system that they were trying out. And they put a tripod with an electronic device on it that linked to a satellite. And as the radar went across and hit anomalies in the soil that indicated burial, they put an orange flag down. But the exact GPS coordinate was fed to this device that went to the satellite and sent it to the mainframe computer outside of Kansas City, so that they were able in one step do what used to take 2 and 3 steps to get to the final device. So we've seen the improvements in the ground penetrating radar. Now, this firm, this is not their main business. They check when stores are being built. They run the radar to find the power lines and the sewer lines and all those things. They check the bridges for bridge integrity to see if there's cracks and those kind of things. If you've seen shows on the Discovery Channel or the History Channel where they're trying to find Billy the Kid's grave, or they found Pilgrim graves someplace in the East, it's this firm that's done most all of that kind of work too.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's a lot of physical labor as well as everything else involved. I know you said that Gail Holmes came in and asked you when he was ready to retire, to get you involved in this work. So is that something also that you're thinking about? How do we can keep this going? Who will come in and
Absolutely. Gail was, I think, 80 or 81 when he talked to me, and he was still active. He stayed active for another few years, and then he spent the last years of his life in a veterans home. I've recruited Scott Howout, who is a spine surgeon by profession, as our new president. He's in training, if you will. Natalie Howout, his wife, her son, a number of years ago, did an Eagle Scout project about the handcart companies and built a memorial to them down by the old mill. And the Historical Pioneer Research Group worked with him and helped with that project. And at that point, I invited Natalie to join our board as our public affairs officer, and she did. And she has been very active. She's the future of the historical group is in good hands with Scott and Natalie, Dr. Young, and Terry, and then Bob are getting older, but they're going to stay engaged as long as they can. So yes, I've recruited the next generation.
yeah, because that's work too. I mean, then that could be an obstacle, but if you're finding the people, then you're well on your way to keep
Yeah.
the work going. That's good. So um, I understand that as you're finding these burial sites, that would be one way to help maybe clarify history or correct history. Is there any other way that this work has done that?
You know, one of the interesting things that I learned is that there is not one history story. Um, every pioneer story, every pioneer's experience and journal reflects the reality of their experience. It may be different than the next pioneer wagon train story. Their experiences may be different. Um, so I have personally attempted to avoid, quote, correcting anyone's history. I'm trying to be responsible to add to the fabric of the whole history because everybody's story is true to their family and true to their experience. You know, John Scott was on Heber C. Kimball's wagon train in 1848, and he was the captain of 10. And they had a whole series of experiences in that wagon train that were markedly different than the other wagon trains that went west. You know, for example, it enumerated all the cattle they had, the horses, the mules, the sheep, the pigs, the goats, the chickens, and 6 squirrels. Now, that's their story. I'm not going to correct it.
I like that from their perspective, and it gets to stay
Yeah.
that way. I like that. So, from all of this study and work, time, energy that you've put in to this, how has this impacted you personally?
Well, personally, I've come to have a much greater appreciation for my ancestry, uh, for the sacrifices that they made. You know, my great 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 grandfather, Jacob Scott, and his family, they joined the church in Canada in the 1830s. John had a brother and 2 sisters. They went through the trials in Missouri. Jacob and his wife died in Nauvoo. Robert Scott and 2 of his sisters fell away from the church, became members of the RLDS church. Some of them joined the Strang movement. And then when Strang was assassinated by one of his counselors, most of those people wound up becoming part of the RLDS church. So I have an appreciation for the challenges that individuals faced in living their life, dealing with the realities of the time, and following their faith. And I appreciate much more my family's uh, steadfastness in following the faith west when part of them fell away. I've come to appreciate my wife's family. Um, Winslow Farr was a powerful member of the church. She has a home rebuilt in Nauvoo. I guess it's seeing the places they were, studying the circumstances that they dealt with, has resonated with me to help me understand and appreciate the incredible, powerful testimonies and the foundation that they laid. When I think about it, by 1890, there were about 90,000 members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that had immigrated to the Great Basin. When I got married in 1962, there were just under 1 million members of the church. Today, this month, Carol and I will be married 63 years, and there are over 17.5 million members of the church. And at least in part, that growth and that expansion of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was a result of the powerful testimonies and sacrifice of these pioneers. And I want to keep telling their story.
Thank you. That was actually very beautiful. And it is so important, and I think it takes some time, maybe as we mature and get older, to realize how important their stories are. So I love what you're doing. So is there anything in addition to preserving these stories that you hope others will be affected by? I mean, the stories are there. How else do you hope that this research can affect people?
Well, my hope now is to have our website rebuilt on a new platform. I'm raising money to do that now so that we can have the information available and then communicate. Natalie Howat does tours. She is engaging with the associations up and down the valley now. She's young and engaged and in the work. We're on YouTube trying to figure out ways to expand the reach of the stories to get more people to come to the database and see the stories, hear the stories. And once they're there, they will be engaged because we have great artwork. We have wonderful stories. We've got live narrations from Gail on a number of the locations. So that's my focus, is figuring out how to spread the reach of the storytellers.
And what is your website again?
earlylds.com.
Okay. Maybe we can help spread it.
Okay, and then on the YouTube channel, it's Historical Pioneer Research Group. And there's a wealth of information there on the YouTube channel. And then the Map and Tour app that's available on a phone or an iPad is another source that, and inside earlylds.com, there are several sites within the site. One site allows a person to enter their ancestor's name, and they can find out what wagon train they're on, what settlement they were in, if they passed away here, what cemetery they were in. When Dr. Shauna Anderson Young retired, she brought with her the BYU Winter Quarters Project. So all of that data is now part of our site, okay? And then the Crossroads Project, which captured all of the stories about the migration across Iowa from the Mississippi to the Missouri and the 90-some settlements, and that wealth of information that Gail gathered, that's on there, the Crossroads Project. And then there's the research, the treasure trove that will be accessed to all of Gail's original research and documentation. So that website is really a wealth of information, and will be even better once we get everything up and on the new site.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, anything else in wrapping this up that you'd like to share?
Well, I guess I would just say that I appreciate all of the people who have dedicated time and effort to telling the story. Denny Henson and her husband and their work with the Mormon Battalion has been outstanding. We hooked up with them very early on. She developed the Map and Tour app, and a Crossroads Project was one of the first. So when I think about people like Denny and her husband, about Gail and the work he did, and about Bob Sharp and Terry Lady and John Anderson Young, these people who are dedicating a portion of their life and resources to telling the story. I really appreciate these people. I'm grateful for the work they do.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. They invest a lot of time, and yes, I agree. Okay, well, thank you, Carl. And we want to give a big thank you to those organizations who have given us this opportunity. This project is made possible through an oral history grant from Utah Humanities, the Utah Historical Society, and funding from the National Mormon Trails Association and the Mormon Battalion Association.